These are the 10 fastest dying states in the United States, and I'm going to tell you why.
Na 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 Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Leolam Va'ed. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Leolam Va'ed. Vehaya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad shmo echad. Hoy na 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 nay nay na 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 nay 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 na nay nay na nay na nay. Hashem melech, Hashem malach, Hashem yimloch, leolam va'ed. Hashem melech, Hashem malach, Hashem yimloch, leolam va'ed. Vehaya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad ושמו אחד. Hoy vehaya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad ושמו אחד. Hoy na 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 nay nay na 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 nay 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 na nay. Hoy nay 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 na nay na nay na nay na 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 nay 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 na 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 nay 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 na nay 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 na na nay. Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad ושמו אחד. Hoy vehaya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad ושמו אחד. Hoy na 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 nay nay na na nay 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 na nay 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 na na nay na na nay na nay na na nay.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im and Torah study. We are going to be studying chapters 11 and 12 of Leviticus this week. I understand that the stream on YouTube was interrupted. That's because I was playing a copyrighted material. I was trying to play Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, which for some reason got stuck in my head today. But YouTube over the years has gotten more and more, shall we say, advanced in their technology to detect what they consider copyrighted material. And so they cut the stream off, but it should be back to normal now. The problem should be solved. Yeah, I know. Exactly. So I have to just make sure to play basically less popular songs. That's just the way it is, or cover versions of that song or whatever. I think the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, this whole copyrighted material thing is taken way too far. It's part of the obsession of the United States of America with money. Everything is money, 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 money. It's insanity. But that's the way it is. So I'll have to play, I guess, more Jewish songs since they're generally not picked up by YouTube's algorithms. But anyway, welcome to this week's Torah study. As I said, we'll be continuing in Leviticus. We'll be continuing in chapter 11. Play without the video, nah, they'll still pick it up. They basically do pattern matching. So they have a database of sounds. I mean, I could try, I suppose, but they have a database of sounds, videos, and what they do is they do pattern matching, and if they match a pattern, then they suspend it. Simple as that. So no big deal. That's the way it is. Okay, so all right, we're gonna get into today's study. I'll start off with my thoughts, my monologue, whatever you want to call it, for the day, and I want to start off with a quote in Ecclesiastes that has really been on my mind a lot lately, and that quote is it's Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 11. I'll post it in Hebrew and maybe in English as well. Let's do it in Hebrew and in English. Let's see if we can get the English going here. Ecclesiastes 3:11. There we go. I think it's going. It's not showing the whole thing. How about if I show this? There we go. Cool. So that's Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. And before I even get into my thoughts on this, I'll just say that if you haven't read Ecclesiastes, or if you haven't read it lately, I highly recommend doing it. There's no good translation into English. It's just the Hebrew is so terse and so beautiful and so expressive. But obviously, if you're still working on your Hebrew, then read it in English or whatever other language. But I would venture to say that Ecclesiastes is the greatest work of philosophy ever in the history of humanity, hands down. So that being said, let's focus on this verse 3:11. So the English translation here, let's see how good it is. I think this is the NIV. Has made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity in the human heart, so that no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. That's not a bad translation at all. Okay, in the Hebrew, it's etakol asayeh bito. He has made everything beautiful in its time, but that's not the part of the verse that I want to focus on. Okay, gam et haolam natan belibam. He's also placed eternity, or the beginning to the end, in their hearts. Mibli asher lo yimsa adam et ha'maaseh asher asa Elohim rosh wa'ad sof. In order that human beings, in order that man cannot understand, cannot find out the deeds that God has done from their beginning to their end. So what does this mean? Well, I can only tell you what it means to me, again, since Ecclesiastes is such a deep work of philosophy written by King Solomon, the wisest man of all times. Then you'd have to ask him what it really means. But I can tell you my understanding of what it means. And this means, so let's pick it apart a little bit. Okay, et olam natan belibam. So olam in modern Hebrew is usually translated as the world, but it really doesn't mean that. It really means from the beginning of time to the end of time. It means all of eternity. In fact, eternity is the way they translate it here, and it's a better translation in the world. So we look up at the stars and we look out into these vast distances, and there's this overwhelming feeling we get. I won't say overwhelming, this feeling of awe that we get, that we're looking at something that is just so awesome, so beyond our ability to comprehend, that it inspires us and humbles us. It inspires us and humbles us at the same time, right? I think anyone who's looked up at the stars at night and has had that experience, or various other things as well. But we'll use the example of the stars at night. So why has he so that means he set eternity in our hearts. When we look up at the stars and we see this, we gaze out into eternity, there's something in our hearts which just, creates a feeling which almost can't be described in words. It's just something that's awesome. We realize there's something so great beyond us that we can't even fathom it. And then it goes on to say, "Mibli asher lo yimsa adam et ha'maaseh," in order that human beings cannot understand the deeds that God has done from their beginning to their end. So he sets into us, Yahweh sets into us this sense of eternity, the sense of awesomeness. Is really almost hard to put in words. A sense of awesomeness, a sense of just being completely overwhelmed by the eternity of it all, by the greatness of it all. The sense of that we're just nothing compared to the great, vast eternity of the universe, and at the same time, we're part of that great, vast eternity of the universe. So Yahweh has made us feel this feeling that we feel when we look up at the stars. And it says, why has he done this? He's done this in order so that we know that we can not understand his works from beginning to end. That his works are so great that it's impossible for us to wrap our heads around it. Okay, he's God, we're man. And so this really got me thinking. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, but the direction I'm going to take it in is this. Okay, we look at the world around us and we see a million paths that we can take, and sometimes we want to try all of these paths. We want to just kind of wrap the world. We want to just take the entire world, the entire universe, and just wrap our arms around it, embrace it, understand it, know it, fathom it, perceive it. And so what do we start doing? We might start going down a lot of these different paths. It's almost like if you take a child to an amusement park, they're going to want immediately to go on all the rides. And they realize, well, we're only spending one day at the amusement park. We can't go on all the rides. We have to pick which rides we want to go on at the end of the day. So that's kind of like the feeling we can get in this world, that we want to experience everything. We want to experience what it is to be an astronaut, what it is to be on the top of Mount Everest, what it is to visit Japan, what it is to, to scuba dive and be at the bottom of the sea, all of these things, visit different countries, places, constantly search and experience different things. And that's great. It's wonderful to explore the earth and explore God's world. And I've certainly done my fair share of that. But what I want to say is that sometimes we have to realize that at the end of the day, we have to find our path. Since we can't go on every single path, we can't be an airline pilot and a scuba diver and a train conductor and an astrophysicist and a doctor and a brain surgeon. We can't do everything. At the end of the day, it's like the kid at the amusement park. We have to realize that we have to take a specific path within this huge, overwhelming world, this universe that we cannot fathom from beginning to end. And so ultimately, what we have to realize is that we have to choose one path, and the path that we choose has to be the path that is right for us. There are many paths in this world that we can choose, and sometimes we start going down these different paths. We think, oh, we're going to wrap our arms around the entire universe. We're going to experience all of these different things, and it ends up actually not being the right choice, because we cannot. We are only human beings. We are here on this earth only for a limited amount of time, and there's only so much that we can do. And if we try to do everything, it's just too much for a human being to do in one lifetime. And it's also not appropriate for us, because each person basically has a path that is right for them. And if they start going down the wrong path in an attempt to say, oh, I think I'll check this out, I wonder what it's like to be a professional football player. So they start going down the path to be a professional football player, even though they know deep inside their hearts that's not their path in life. They know that they don't really have a chance of being a professional football player, and it actually ends up being a big mistake. It actually ends up causing a lot of pain and suffering, rather than enabling a person who does that when it's not their path to really kind of experience the world on a high level. So ultimately, what this verse means to me is that since the entire world, the entire universe is completely overwhelming. It's beyond our ability to fathom from beginning to end, that we have to find a path. We have to cut out a swath within this universe, within space and time, which is the correct one for us. And each of us knows deep down inside what that correct path is. And sometimes we wander off different paths in an attempt to explore this universe, which is fine to a certain degree, but we wander off different paths and then we end up not being on our path, because each person, each individual is unique. Each individual, let me take this verse down right now. No, I'll just leave it up. Each individual is unique, and each individual has a certain mission and a certain path in this life. And ultimately, what we need to do is get on that path. If we're not on that path, if we're on a different path that's not appropriate for us, and why do we do it? Again, a desire to see everything, to embrace everything. But this verse tells us, he's also set eternity in the human heart so that no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. We cannot understand, we cannot experience everything that God has done from beginning to end. We cannot, even if we were to spend our entire lives, our entire 70 or 80 or 90 years traveling around the world, we're still not going to see every corner. We're not going to see every plant. We're not going to see every mountaintop. And even if we did, if we went back there 5 or 10 years later, it would be different, right? The world is constantly changing. The world is constantly in flux. So in space and time, we can only cut out a swath in space and time of that huge, constantly changing eternity, that eternity that's constantly changing wherever we are through space, and that is constantly changing in time through time. So ultimately, we have to find out what our particular path is. And once we do, then we realize something quite incredible. If we choose the path in life that is right for us, that is set aside in advance for us, since Yahweh created each one of us as a special individual, and since he created a wide variety of paths, then there's got to be one path that is completely in tune, that is completely in line with who we are. In other words, that is in a certain sense chose specially for us. And once we're able to identify that path and start walking down that path, then we realize a number of amazing things. Okay, number one, we realize that it's just right for us. It feels right for us. And we realize that maybe we don't have to start searching out all of these other paths in life in order to fulfill ourselves if we found the one right path that is correct for us. Okay. Another thing that we realize, and this is really kind of the insight that I had this week, is if we walk down that path that is right for us, that is kind of custom made just for us, since it's our path, it's our unique path in life, it actually gives us, it's the only path that can give us the perspective that allows us to, in a certain sense, embrace, to give a big hug, to understand better the entire universe. It's like our chosen path. Imagine if there are a bunch of different mountain passes or a bunch of paths going through the mountain, and we have to choose the one that is right for us. And if we choose this right path, then we're going to get the most beautiful view of all the surrounding scenery, of all the surrounding mountains. But each person, depending on their personality, has a different path, which is going to maximize that experience. When we choose our specific path in life, the one that's right for us, then it kind of cancels out this verse. We are able, because it's a path that's made for our unique perspective, we're able to look out from that path, and we're able to really understand and make sense of and see the entire universe almost from the beginning to the end, because we've chosen that custom-made path, that path that is right for us. Okay, I'll give you, let's say, an example. All right, let's say someone knows they need to be a doctor in life or something like that. This has been their passion since they're a little child. They always liked helping people, healing people, and as they go down life, they say, well, I don't know, I know I want to be a doctor, but I always wonder what it's like to be a banker. Bankers make a lot of money and they get to wear nice suits and they have prestige and all that kind of stuff. I would never want to be a banker, but I'll just use that as an example. And they start going down that path thinking the grass is greener on the other side, or thinking it's going to bring them some kind of happiness, some kind of salvation, some kind of feeling of connection with the universe. They're going to experience something that they otherwise would not have experienced. And they realize very quickly that this is the wrong path. It doesn't bring them any of that. In fact, what it does is it disconnects them from who they are. It disconnects them from their essence. It disconnects them from the universe. It disconnects them from their creator, from Yahweh, their creator. And they just end up feeling like they're just lost in the thicket, lost in the jungle somewhere. They've chosen a path, that such a person has chosen a path that is not right for them. And they didn't get what they wanted, which was to see more of the universe. they actually got the opposite. Now they're seeing less of the universe because that is not the right path for them. Now they realize that and go back and say, when they're, I don't know, 35, 40, 45 years old, okay, I'm going to go back to medical school. It's always been my dream to be a doctor. That's what my heart says. And that's what my passion is. And that's what I've always wanted to do. And they go back and do that. Then suddenly they're on the right path. And all of a sudden the worlds around them open up. The universe seems to just fall in place. Everything seems to have its place. Everything now seems to make sense. They feel like they're at one with themselves. They feel like they're at one with the universe. They feel like they're at one with Yahweh. And by going down this path, they're actually able to get the correct perspective on the world around them, on the universe around them that was custom made for them, because they are in tune with the path that they're supposed to be walking on. And now they look out from that path and the whole universe just looks like beautiful, in line. They could see the whole thing almost from the beginning to the end. Okay, so I know that's kind of esoteric. It sounds almost mystical, whatever you want to call it. But that's the message that I think that I've really thought about a lot this week, and that I want to pass on for my opening monologue. That as human beings, it's very tempting to go run around like the child. When you bring him to the amusement park, it opens at 10 o'clock in the morning and it starts running around and goes, I want to go on this ride, I want to go on that ride, I'm going to go that. There's 300 rides at the amusement park. And in the end, the child learns, well, I've got to choose the rides that I really want to go on. I can't go on all the rides. So the same way for us in our life, we're limited to 70 or 80 or 90 years on this earth, that we, instead of following that temptation to just run around and choose all of the paths and think we're going to experience the universe that way, it's an impossibility. The world, the universe is too great, even to explore, let's say, even our hometown. There may be areas of our hometown where we grew up where we don't even know every nook and cranny of our own hometown. So how are we going to explore the entire world, let alone the entire universe, in the 70 or 80, 90 years that we're here on this earth? So ultimately what we have to do is say, okay, that's unrealistic. That's an impossibility. That's a goal that must be an illusion. It must not be true, because I can't do it. And so even if I could try to start doing it, it's not going to work out. It's not going to allow me to see the entire universe, because I don't have time to see the entire universe, and the entire universe is changing anyway. So then in the end of the day, what we end up realizing, or what we should end up realizing, what we have to end up realizing, is that we have to choose that one path that is right for us. And then by taking that one path, that gives us the proper perspective. We are now in line with ourselves. We're in line with the world. We're in line with the universe. We're in line with the people around us. And we're in line with our Creator, who created us and put within each of us the idea that we have a certain mission, a certain path for us. And once we start walking down that path and kind of putting the blinders on and just saying, I'm very curious about what these other paths look like, but I'm not going to take them because I know they're not right for me. Once we start walking down our correct path, our path, then all of the universe starts opening up before us, because it's the path that is completely designed, that is correct, that is predetermined, preordained for us to be our path. It's almost like we become aligned with the rest of the universe. And that gives us the perspective, that gives us the feeling that we always wanted, the feeling that we always hoped we would have by running around trying all these different paths of trying to capture everything, to embrace everything, to see everything. That now gives us that perspective when we're walking down our one path. We are now in line with the universe. And as we look out from that path to the rest of the universe, knowing that the other paths are not right for us, knowing that they're not our paths, and therefore it's very tempting to take them, but we're gonna stick to the path that's right for us. Then that allows us really to almost, as I said, cancel out this verse. It gives us our unique perspective and allows us to see and to start fathoming the entire universe from its beginning to end, because we're in line with it at this point. Okay, so that's my message. I know it's a bit maybe mystical, a bit maybe esoteric, whatever you want to call it. But this is something that I've really been contemplating a lot this week, because like everyone else, I have spent much time in my life going down the wrong paths, making mistakes, realizing that such and such, that a particular path is a dead end, that it might be a nice path, but it's not the right path for me, that it didn't get me what I thought it would get me. It didn't give me the perspective, that feeling of, being, we all want to, in a certain sense, like, again, embrace the entire universe. We want to be kings over our own destiny. We want to be, what is that song? Everyone wants to rule the world. I'm not even talking about ruling the world, but we want to feel like we're on top of the world, that we have everything, that we understand and see and know everything. But by running around trying all these different paths, we think we might achieve that, but it actually does the opposite. It actually just takes us off our natural path, our natural flow that is unique and that is preordained and that is correct for us within these millions, these infinite different paths that we can take in the universe. So my message for everyone today is to think, to introspect, to figure out what that path is that is correct for you in your life. Maybe you've been ignoring it for years or for decades. Maybe you got dragged down the wrong path. Maybe you made mistakes. Maybe you know that you should be somewhere else doing something else than what you're supposed to be doing right now, but you're stuck. Or maybe you've taken the right path and you felt the satisfaction and the wonderful feelings of having taken the right path in your life. But whatever it is, whether you're on that path or not on that path, or partially on that path and partially not on that path, then I encourage everyone to sit down, to really pray, to introspect, to figure out what is that one unique path that is carved out through this infinite universe for you, and to correct course, to change direction if you're not on that path, and to start as soon as you can, to the best of your ability. Maybe it doesn't come immediately. Maybe it takes time. Maybe it takes courage. Maybe it takes some kind of thing in your life that you didn't plan to push you onto that path, some unexpected thing. But to think about what your path is, to reach out to Yahweh, to pray to Yahweh to help you find what that path is, and then to pray to Him to help you help Him put you back on that path, so that you can see the universe from that unique perspective that has been created uniquely for you as a unique individual, special human being created in His image. And so that way you can actually, from that vantage point, wrap your arms around the entire universe and get the best vantage point of the rest of the universe that is correct and that is right for you as an individual. So that is my message for today. That's my thoughts for today. And let me pray and say that I hope that each and every one of us is able to pray and meditate and find out what that path is, and get on that path when possible. Okay, so that's my opening monologue for the day. We're now going to go into studying the book of Leviticus. Let me hide this comment here, and let me bring up Leviticus. So a couple of things, just practical announcements regarding what happens sometimes. If you notice, if I'm going through the text and you don't see the text on your screen, please let me know in the comments one way or another, because I am on a regular basis. I'll go back to the screen and check the comments. Okay, so for instance, now we're going to start talking about Leviticus 11. If you don't see Leviticus 11 on the screen, which you don't right now because I haven't put it on yet, but if I'm doing the study and you don't see the text that we're talking about on the screen, please write in the comments that you don't see it, because I need to know that. Sometimes I forget to post the text or the material that we're discussing on the screen. Okay. And the other thing is, as we now know, for anyone who's joined the Torah study for a while, for some reason, Chrome once throughout each one of the Torah studies decides it's time to freeze up, and I get on my screen a little rotating beach ball, and I know that means that it's about to freeze up. But I noticed actually last week by watching the replay on YouTube that it already starts to freeze before I get the beach ball. So if you notice that my face is frozen or the material is frozen, if you hear the audio, but the video is not in line with the audio, like let's say it just freezes up like this, and then a couple of minutes later, then it goes like that and like that. If something doesn't seem right, again, please let me know, because that's a sign to me that Chrome is on its way to freezing up. And so that means I have to quit out of it. I actually have to close down the computer and start the computer again. Okay. So again, if you see any of these anomalies while we're doing the study, if you don't see the material we're talking about, or if you see the material is frozen, if my face is frozen, then please let me know, because it makes the Torah study much better when the material is flowing along with what we're talking about. Okay. All right. So that being said, let me bring up Leviticus 11, which is where we left off last week. We'd started talking about the birdies, the birdies, and we will get to the bees as well. So we'll talk about the birds and the bees. A good Linux machine will probably fix it. Probably, maybe. I've got a Mac. Mac OS is pretty darn good, I got to say. I don't think, and I'm a computer guy. That's my background, as a couple of people are here, such as Phil. I don't know if you can hear us right now. But the bottom line is, I don't think it's a Mac problem or a Linux problem or anything like that. I think it's actually a StreamYard problem. StreamYard is the streaming platform that I use, right? You see here, StreamYard, and or it's a Chrome problem. But I have no idea. If I have time, maybe I'll write a support ticket to StreamYard, and I'm sure they're aware of the problem, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that happens to. But I haven't found any solution. I uninstalled Chrome, I reinstalled Chrome, I updated the operating system, I did all kinds of different things. At the end of the day, I'm not going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours trying to track down a problem which I may never track down. Get caught up in that tech black hole, that endless black hole that just sucks you in. Oh, I'll try this and I'll try that, and I'll read these forums and that forum, and in the end, who knows if I'm going to find the answer or not. So I'm not going to do that. What I might do is write StreamYard a support ticket and let them know about that, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. At this point, it's not a showstopper. I mean, it is temporarily, because it means that things are frozen up, and that means I have to shut down the computer and come back in, which usually takes about 5 minutes. But it's not such a severe problem that it completely destroys what we're trying to do here. So I'm just going to let it slide. But just let me know if you see weird things coming on, if you see things freezing up, or if you don't see the material that we're talking about. Okay, so that being said, let me now share the screen. There we go. So you should now be looking at Leviticus chapter 11. And we got down to the birds last week. And remember that the birds were the ones that are considered unclean, or again, it's usually translated as unclean and clean, or impure and pure, ritually impure, ritually pure. Those are the typical translations. In the case of the foods, I'm translating them as acceptable and unacceptable, or acceptable for eating, acceptable for a human being to eat, and disgusting or vile for a human being to eat. And that's really the essence of what kosher is. It's really the essence of what kashrut is. Something I didn't mention last week, but I've mentioned in the past whenever we've studied kashrut, is if you notice the laws of kashrut, they never have anything to do with plants. There are no restrictions on plants whatsoever. There are restrictions in the Torah, for instance. You cannot eat the fruit of a tree until the 5th year, but that's not what I'm talking about. There's no such thing as an unclean plant in the Torah. It only has to do with animals. It only has to do with animal flesh, right? There are certain things among the animals, and by the way, I think that is a hint that we know. First of all, we know, as it says in Leviticus, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, if I'm not mistaken, we know that when we as human beings were in the Garden of Eden, we were vegetarian, we were vegan basically, and I think that's a hint that ultimately all of humanity is going to return to veganism. There are many other verses that imply that. There've been entire books on that. There's a rabbi in Israel who I think that's kind of his expertise. He writes about a lot of these kind of things. But I think the fact that kashrut, that which is considered disgusting, or that which is considered acceptable to eat and not acceptable to eat, has nothing to do with plants. You can walk up to any plant anywhere in the world. You don't have to know what the species is. And in terms of it being kosher or unkosher, you can eat it. It may be poisonous, probably not a good idea if it's poisonous to eat it. But from a kosher or unkosher point of view, you can eat any plant in the world anywhere without any concern whatsoever. So the idea of acceptable and unacceptable foods only has to do with the animal world. Okay, so I thought I'd point that out. So we spoke about the mammals. Okay, and we said there are two criteria that criteria number one is they have to have split hooves, completely, not just split, but completely cleaved hooves. The two halves of the hooves have to have a discernible gap in between them. And then the other one is they have to be ruminants. They have to chew their cud. Chewing the cud means that they regurgitate they have multiple stomachs and they regurgitate their food from one stomach to the next stomach in an attempt to further process it so that it ultimately becomes able to be assimilated into the body. Right. That's what cows do. That's what sheep do. These are all ruminants. Okay. And so that's the criteria for mammals. And that, as we saw, basically leaves us with the large flock and herd animals: the cow and the bull and the deer and the antelope play and and the sheep, the reindeer. All of these kinds of large herd and flock animals are basically what at the end of the day this boils down to, and that makes a lot of sense, I think, because these are very for the most part, gentle, as it's been pointed out. I'm not making this up. These tend to be gentle animals. I mean, any animal when it's cornered or in fear can become quite violent. But they're vegetarians. They're basically grazers. They're large and majestic for the most part. And they tend to just kind of, I don't know, look good, shall we say, or look look like they're not disgusting, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to eat a rat, you wouldn't want to eat a mouse, you wouldn't want to eat a snake, you wouldn't want to eat a dog or a cat. These are things that just, they're just, I think, just on an intuitive basis, people would say, I wouldn't want to eat any of this stuff anyway. It's kind of just not appropriate for human beings to eat. And this is what Yahweh codifies in his laws. As I always say, and a lot of times when I'll argue, I mentioned this last week, is when I argue these points with atheists or with people who are not Torah following, they'll say, well, it's culturally based. The only reason that it seems to you that cows and sheep are acceptable to eat and cats and dogs are not acceptable to eat is because you grew up in a culture where that was the case. If you grew up in a different culture, let's say I actually found out that a friend of mine who has an Indonesian wife, not Jewish, said that his Indonesian wife used to eat dogs back when she grew up in Indonesia. So he said to me, well, if you grew up in Indonesia, then it would be acceptable for you to eat dogs and to eat cats and to eat God knows what, right? So it's a cultural thing. That's a typical response that atheists will say, that you don't even realize how much you've been acculturated into thinking that it's only cows and sheep that are acceptable to eat. You think it's from God. It's not from God. The Torah is expressing what the ancient cultures already thought, and it's we human beings infusing it into the text of the Torah, and not God telling us what is acceptable and unacceptable. So that's a typical atheist view, and I always respond. Of course, it always falls on deaf ears when you're speaking to atheists, but I always respond that well, you know what? If God exists, then he also has an aesthetic. He also has a right to decide what he thinks is acceptable to eat and what is not acceptable to eat. Okay? If I, as someone who grew up in the United States of America, and is not there now, if I, as someone who grew up in the United States of America, developed a certain cultural aesthetic on what's acceptable to eat and what's not acceptable to eat, and someone else who grew up in a different culture, let's say in Indonesia, grew up with a different or developed a different aesthetic as to what is acceptable to eat and what is not acceptable to eat. Well, then if God exists, he also might have an aesthetic as to what he thinks is acceptable to eat, is acceptable for human beings to eat, and or acceptable to eat and not acceptable to eat. And if that is the case, if God, just like individual human beings, were created in the image of God, so if we have an aesthetic, then he might also have an aesthetic. And if his aesthetic says that large ruminants with split and fully cleft hoods are what he considers acceptable to eat, and any other mammals are not acceptable to eat, well, then he has a right to express his aesthetic as well. He has a right to express his opinion as well. And if he does exist, and if he does have an aesthetic, and if we do want to be followers of this God, and if we are to be followers of this God, then we have to go by his aesthetic. He's the boss. So that's usually my response. Again, it falls on deaf ears, but for anyone who's not an atheist, like I would assume everyone in this group, then it makes perfect sense. right? If we ourselves can decide what's right and wrong to eat, well, so can God. And if God decides, then He can tell us what is right and wrong to eat in His perspective. And I go even further and say that and again, the proof is we spoke about last week that we see already very early in the Torah, long before there was an Israel, long before there was an Abraham and Isaac and a Jacob, that already humanity had a sense of what was acceptable to eat and what was not acceptable to eat. We saw two examples. We saw that Abel in Genesis chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken, 3, 4, chapter 4, brought as an offering. He brought the flocks. He brought sheep. He was a shepherd, so he brought sheep. And we saw also that Noah took onto the ark 7 pairs of kosher animals and only 1 pair of unkosher animals. So both Abel and Noah had already an idea or already had a concept of animals that were acceptable to eat. And same language is used, clean and unclean. It's exactly the same language that we see here in Leviticus chapter 11. Again, it's if we were to modernize it or to use the rabbinical parlance, it would be exactly the same language, kosher and unkosher. It uses exactly the same language when speaking about Noah bringing the animals on the ark, as it does here in Leviticus 11, speaking about what animals are, quote unquote, kosher and unkosher. Okay, so we see that humanity already had a sense long before the Torah was given, long before Abraham was even born, of kosher and unkosher animals. This also implies that even non-Israelites can develop or can come back to that original understanding. They can go back to their true selves, their origins, and they can understand that even for them, that unkosher animals are unacceptable. Not just for Israelites, we are required to, because we're in covenant with Yahweh, to express His will, to fulfill and to teach His will to the rest of the world, or to set an example for the rest of the world. But even non-Israelites who are not part of the covenant can through these laws that have been put in contract with the nation of Israel, can realize that even they are really not supposed to be eating all these disgusting foods like shrimp, which I always say are basically sea maggots, and lobster, which are basically giant sea cockroaches, and God knows what else. I mean, lobster is considered a delicacy. It just blows my mind. It's the most disgusting thing not to look at. It's beautiful. I saw it, and when I was in Eilat in 2019, I went snorkeling. I saw lobsters kind of like hanging out under the pier there. They're wonderful sea creatures to look at, but I would not want to eat these giant, basically sea insects. And I wouldn't want to eat shrimp, which are basically little tiny sea maggots. So to get back to the main point, Yahweh has an aesthetic, which, since He's God, is in a certain sense the objective aesthetic. Yes, Americans may have their opinion. Indonesians may have their opinion of what's right and wrong to eat, what's acceptable and unacceptable to eat. But if Yahweh also has opinion, then that becomes the opinion for all of humanity, because Father knows best, so to speak. So that's that. So we spoke about those with mammals, and then we got to the sea creatures, the fish, basically, not the fish, the sea creatures. And we saw that the requirements there are fins and scales. Basically, we're talking about your average run-of-the-mill fish. When you, as a little kid, were in the 2nd grade and drew a fish, right? That's what you drew. Average run-of-the-mill fish with scales and fins, okay? That excludes things like sharks, eels, catfish, shrimp, lobster, any other kind of of lower level crustaceans. It excludes all of that, and it leaves us basically with your standard kind of looking fish, right? Like this guy over here. Okay, I don't know. Let's use an example of a a sea bass. Okay, there you go. Come on. Let's try that again. Okay, there's your sea bass. We have our fins, we have our scales. It's what we call a fish, okay? As opposed to, let's say, a shark, okay, which, as you notice, has fins. Come on, shark, but has no scales, okay? So this is not considered acceptable by Yahweh, who sets the objective aesthetic for all of humanity as something that is acceptable for humans to eat. Okay, then we got to the birds, the little birdies. Actually, kind of all, it includes also the bat. The bat is not a bird, the bat is a mammal. And so basically creatures, large creatures that fly in the sky. We're not talking about insects at this point. We're talking about large creatures that fly in the sky. And here we didn't get specific criteria. We got lists of species or of types of flying creatures that are large flying creatures. I'll just go with birds that are unacceptable to eat. And we did see, however, that they fall into specific categories, that many of them are birds of prey. They're the type of birds that swoop down from the sky and carry off live or dead prey. And then we saw that for some reason, the Torah really doesn't like owls. We have like 6 different types of owls, and then also bat flying mammals. Okay, that we know already from, well, we didn't have to necessarily glean it from here because these are mammals that walk on land. But okay, so this was lumped together with the birds, with large flying creatures, so that any mammals, the example here is the bat, but as I said last week, I think it could clearly extend to other flying mammals, the flying squirrel and the like. These are unacceptable to eat. So yes, although species are given or specific types of birds, I think you can do some extrapolation by trying to find the characteristics of these different types of birds that are off limits, and any other bird or any other flying creature that's similar to it. Again, I'll give you the example of, it says the bat. Does that mean because it doesn't mention the flying squirrel that the flying squirrel is acceptable to eat? Obviously, I think logic would dictate that it is not, that you cannot eat a flying squirrel, even though it's not mentioned explicitly here. So I think you can extrapolate from these different species, these different types of birds that are given, and extrapolate to extend it to other similar species. Okay? Owls kill babies. I didn't know that. I don't know that much about owls, to be honest. Okay. So now we get up to verse 20, and we get other flying things, but these are not big flying animals. These are insects that swarm in the sky. So now we're going to switch over to Hebrew. We'll pick it up here, and we'll go to the end of Leviticus 11, and then we'll start with Leviticus chapter 12, which really, in earnest, I mean, already here, this already begins the next major issue. Remember, I said there are 2 major issues in the book of Leviticus. The first is the sacrificial system, the details of the sacrificial system, which we covered in Leviticus 1 through 7. And then the second issue is the issue of ritual cleanliness / ritual uncleanliness, cleanliness versus uncleanliness. This is already starting in chapter 11, because again, here, even the translation is unclean, clean. Okay, so that's the same language, tameh and tahor. Tameh means unclean, or tahor means clean. Sometimes it's translated as pure. Sometimes it's translated as ritually pure, ritually clean. And tameh means the opposite of that. Okay, so we're already really starting the topic here, but in earnest, when it already starts here for sure. But when we get further into it, we're going to see that really that the main focus of it is not what animals are acceptable to eat or unacceptable to eat, but how a person can place himself or get into a state of being ritually unclean himself, and then how he can get out of it. Okay, so we'll talk about that. All right, let's pick it up here in Leviticus 11, chapter 11, verse 20, and I'll switch over to the Hebrew now. Any questions, any comments? Yes, it's true, Martha. I don't know. I was just giving that an example. I know they glide. It's true. They don't really have wings. I think they kind of have like wings that they can glide on. Okay. All right. So let's see where we were. We said verse 20. Okay. So remember, there are 2 words in Hebrew that I want you guys to focus on that sound alike, but they're not alike. And let's see if we can find it. One second here. One second. Sheretz. Okay. So one is sheretz, and the other is sheketz. And here in verse 10, and we'll see other verses where they're both used in the same verse, but here in verse 10, in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 10, they're both used, okay? So sheretz means to swarm. It's the way that it's usually translated as. Here in this case, in the case of the fishes, it means swim or perhaps swim in schools, okay? And sheketz means something that is disgusting. How do they translate it again? Abomination, but I don't like that translation. We looked at this. Yes, a detestation, a detestable thing. So sheketz means a detestable thing, something that should be avoided. It should be avoided because it's detestable to us. Okay, it's vile to us. And a sheretz is something that swarms. Okay, so sheretz, sheketz. We're going to see those words again and again throughout chapter 11. I think they're actually used on purpose because the Torah loves to use all kinds of, shall we say, word plays on words to get its point across, to be more poetic, to be more able to be remembered. Okay, so sheretz and sheketz sound alike, and even though they don't mean the same thing, they're used throughout Leviticus chapter 11, as we're going to see when we pick it up right here. Mikol b'mayim, that was the oath. So here we go. So we're starting off in verse 20. Follow along in English if you're still working on your Hebrew. And I recommend that if you're not, then everyone should really be trying to work on their biblical Hebrew. Even if you just do it a little bit, even if you just learn how to read the letters and the vowels, that is already an amazing accomplishment. Because when we're going through the text in Hebrew, or when you're attending any study or anything where they're going through the text in Hebrew, you'll be able to follow along. That's already a huge advantage, even if you don't yet know what it means. That's the first step. Okay, so verse 20, kol sheretz ha'of ha'olech al arba sheketz hu lechem. So here we have sheretz and sheketz. Two words appear again. So kol sheretz ha'of. So anything that swarms through the skies, I'll translate it as literally. Sheretz means anything that is swarming, a swarmer, and ha'of means that flies. So any swarming thing that flies, or anything that swarms through the skies. So what swarms through the skies? Let's see, gnats. Let's see, what else? Locusts. We're talking about these kinds of things, okay? Haolech al arba, that walks on four legs. So anything that swarms through the skies and has four legs, sheketz, there's our word sheketz, it is a detestable thing to you, okay? So we're talking here about insects, flying insects, basically, okay? So let's see. We're going to go on to verse 21. But there's an exception. And we're going to talk about why there's an exception. And we're going to be giving some examples of these exceptions. Okay? Let me just translate. But, so we were just told that anything that swarms through the sky, basically insects, flying insects, that has four legs is a detestable thing to us. Now, the Torah in verse 21 says, but of those things that swarm through the sky and that have four legs, these you can eat. So there are exceptions. Why is there an exception? We're going to talk about that for a second, in a second, okay? Think about it while we're moving ahead here. Why do you think that this exception was made? And I have my opinion. It's not explicit in the Torah. It's not only my opinion. It's kind of a common opinion, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so asher lo kir'ayim ale raglav. So those swarming four-legged, those flying swarming four-legged insects that their knees go above their legs, and we'll see examples. They are acceptable. Okay, that they use to jump on the land. Okay, so if they have four legs with knees above the legs, and that setup is to allow them to hop on the land. Okay, these you may eat. Okay, or these among them, among what? Among the swarming, flying, four-legged creatures. Okay. Et arbe lemino, wet silaim leminehu, wet Ahargol leminehu wa et hagav leminehu. So now we get 4 species that are mentioned, or 4 types of insects that are mentioned, and I'm just going to use the standard translation. As I mentioned, we could sit here, we can have an entire Torah study on what exactly these species are. And as I've mentioned, there are academics, there are people in academia who've spent their entire careers translating biblical Hebrew plant and animal names into what they believe are the species that are being spoken about. And there's a lot of disagreement, a lot of ongoing work in this topic. So I'm just going to go with the standard translations here. So the arabet is the locust. That is actually one of the 10 plagues that we saw. So that's pretty clear. Okay. Limino et the salam. I think I said salaim. No, the salam. Here they translate it as destroying locust. So we'll go with that. The hargol, the cricket, and et the hagav, the grasshopper. So let's take a look at one of these insects. We'll go with the example I always like to use is the praying mantis. And the reason that I like to use this example, oops. So notice, first of all, it has 4 legs. Okay, it's got 2 hands, but it's got 4 legs. And notice that in the case of these legs, the knees, especially we see it here, but the knees are above the legs, right? The knees protrude out. Maybe we use a grasshopper instead. It'll be a bit more clear. The reason I use a praying mantis, grasshopper. There we go. There we go. That one's pretty clear. Okay. So we see it's 4 legs. It's using 2 of them. Let's find a better picture. Here we go. There we go. You get the idea. Okay. So we see it's 4 legs. Okay. And we see that the knees can extend up above the bottom of the legs. And it uses this setup to be able to hop along the ground. So this would actually be kosher. The reason I use the praying mantis is because when we were growing up, when I grew up in the suburbs of New York, we were always told that if you kill a praying mantis, it's a $50 fine. Well, I looked it up much later. It turns out that that was just an urban legend. It wasn't the case, but I was always afraid growing up to kill praying mantises. Not that I went around randomly killing insects, but I was extra careful with praying mantises because I was always told that it's illegal to kill a praying mantis, and you could be fined $50, which was a lot more than $50 back then. Okay, so that's the grasshopper, and that is a kosher insect. Okay, it flies through the air. It has 4 legs. We see that the knees, okay, in this case, it's using its 2 front legs to grab a leaf, but those knees can extend up above the bottoms of the legs, and it hops along the ground. Here we go. Here's another picture. Maybe this one's even better. Okay, and it hops along the ground. I guess these 2 are the legs. I guess these are considered the hands. These are the legs. These are the legs, etc. Okay, so it's 4-legged, and it's a hopper. Okay. So that is considered kosher. That's considered acceptable to eat. Okay. Praying mantis equals Kohen? I don't get it. So that is considered acceptable to eat. Why? Again, Yahweh sets the aesthetic. Yahweh decides he has an aesthetic. He has a right to express his aesthetic if he exists and if he's in contact with us and communicates with us. And he's decided that according to his aesthetic, this is acceptable. You want to argue about it, then go argue with him. You want to make a case that the grasshopper is not acceptable to eat, then file a complaint or put a request in the suggestion box. Hey, Yahweh, I think grasshoppers, I think they're disgusting. You should not allow us to eat it. I don't know why you decided to allow us to eat grasshoppers. Okay, put it in the suggestion box, and if the boss approves the change, then I'm sure he'll let us know one way or another. But I'm being facetious. But the point is that this is his aesthetic, and he's decided it's acceptable to eat. But there is another reason, and I think the reason is clear, and that's that mammals and fowl, and sometimes even fish are either too expensive or they're hard to come by. If you're in the desert, like the Israelites were for 40 years, you're probably not going to go fishing a lot. Okay, so I think that this was is the word dispensation? Is that the right word? Just look that up. All right. Find out I'm using it incorrectly. Dispensation. exemption from a rule or usual requirement. Exactly. This is a dispensation. It's kind of an exception. And it's given because insects, if you don't have enough money to afford a cow or a sheep or even birds or fish, or you don't have them available, then what are you going to eat? So I think Yahweh made this dispensation to allow poor people or people who didn't have the other types of food readily available, to allow them basically not to starve to death not to starve without feeling guilty that they're going to have to eat something that's unkosher. Okay, that's what I think the reasoning is behind this. We see this also in the case of, where is it? I have to remember now. Leviticus. I'm not going to hunt it down if I can't find it. Let's see. Was it 6 maybe? Supreme guilt offering. Let me just go to the English for a second. Grain offering. So Moses offering Aaron's sin offering. One second. Fellowship offering. Those a vow, meat that touches anything. Just give me 1 second here. No. Oh boy. Where is it? I know how to do it. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna hunt it down now. But let me try one more time to just hunt it down. 1 second. Let's see. I think I know how I could do it. 1 second. This is kind of, oops. Yeah. Let's try that again. There we go. Leviticus chapter 5. Okay. So this is speaking about this is sin offering, the chatat, the fourth of the 5 types of offerings that we studied. So if you realize that you have to bring a sin offering, so you're supposed to bring a female lamb or goat. And then it says in verse 7, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 7, anyone who could not afford a lamb is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to Yahweh as a penalty for their sin, etc. Let's go on. And then in verse 11, if, however, they cannot afford 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, they are to bring as an offering for the sin 1/10 of an ephah of the finest flour for a sin offering. Okay, so we see that for this type of sin offering, you're supposed to bring a female lamb or goat. But if you can't afford it, no problem. God doesn't want to destroy you financially to help you atone for your sins. So you bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. If you can't afford that, if you're really poor, then you can bring flour. You can bring a basket of flour. Okay? So, and the rabbis call this, by the way, a korban ole ve'yored, an up and down, or a very variable offering. I don't like that terminology because it almost makes it sound like it's an extra offering. It's not. It's part of the sin offering, but it takes into account the fact that not everyone can afford a female goat or a lamb, or not everyone can afford to spare from their flock or to purchase a female goat or a lamb. It was expensive back in the day. Just think about it now. If you went to the butcher and tried to purchase all of the meat from an entire sheep, then how much is that going to cost? I don't know, $100, $200. It's going to be a lot of money, right? So the Torah allows for less expensive offerings to be brought. If you can't afford it, if you can't afford the more expensive offerings, and it actually gives you 3 tiers. It's almost like a Patreon. You have different tiers. You have the gold tier, the silver tier, and the bronze tier. It's on the Patreon page that I did. So it's the same idea here, right? And I guess the idea is that each person should assess their financial status, their financial abilities, and bring the highest level that they can, but not more than that. So Yahweh is very understanding of the reality of living in this world. He doesn't want us to put ourselves out to the degree that it's going to bankrupt us to atone for our sins. Okay. On the other hand, he doesn't want he doesn't want the rich person to just bring flour, because now it becomes almost meaningless. Right? If you're not investing a little bit in your sacrifices, then you're kind of, learn your lesson. Okay, and you're supposed to learn a lesson from bringing sacrifices. All right, so I think that's the idea here. Where were we? Okay. And I'll read it again in English. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean, actually to be regarded as detestable by you. There are, however, some flying insects that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper, but all other flying insects that have 4 legs you are to regard as detestable. It says unclean, but it really is that word again, sheketz, detestable. Okay, let's go back to the Hebrew. Okay, and this is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many biblical scholars, this is a dispensation. Here's the word sheketz. Okay, sheketz. The word sheketz appears a number of times. Sheketz. That means a despicable or despisable. Again, what was the word they use? A detestable thing. Okay, sheretz. That means a swarming thing. In this case, insects that swarm through the sky. Here we have sheretz, swarm. Here we have sheketz, detestable. Okay, so that's it. And the whole thing, in my opinion, is a dispensation to people who just can't afford to eat, who can't afford to eat sheep or goats or cows, so that they have something that is inexpensive to eat. Okay, all right, let's go on. Any questions? Any comments before we move on? If the Israelites in the desert came across clean animals, birds, and insects, they could eat them, right? Yes, I would think so. There were a couple of cases where they did. We have the incident twice. Well, the first time was right before the manna, but then again, we have the incident with the Israelites crying out for meat, and he brings the Slav, how do you say Slav again in English? I forgot the word in English. Those birdie thingies. Oh God, how do you call them in English again? I forgot. It doesn't matter. At any rate, so yeah, I think that's the case. Okay. We're going to go on now to verse 24. Okay. So now these are animals that are unacceptable. Again, we had mammals, we had fish, we had birds, we had insects. And that basically sums up that section. No, we're going to get more, but for now it sums it up. And it says, Ula'ela tit am'u kono negeh b'nivlatam yitma ad ha'arev. So le'ele, so for all of these, and I don't know if it's talking about the insects because it doesn't make sense. We can talk about what it's referring to, but for these different types of animals, anyone who touches their carcasses, anyone who has contact with their carcasses, they become ritually unclean. So this is really the first place that we see that we're speaking about human beings becoming ritually unclean. From here to here, we spoke about animals that were unclean, that were unacceptable to us. But now that same phraseology, that clean versus unclean, or that ritually pure versus ritually impure, for the first time here in verse 24, is being used to refer to a status that we as human beings can achieve. But the difference is that we can move in and out of that status depending on what actions we take, as we will see throughout a lot of the rest of this chapter. Okay, so if we touch any of their carcasses of these unkosher animals, and we can have a discussion. Does this include the insects? Because how could you, we come in contact all the time with dead insects. So I would claim it doesn't. At any rate, we'll leave that off to the side for now. V'chol hanoseh nivlatam, and anyone who lifts up, who carries their carcasses, their dead bodies, yichabes biradao, shall wash his clothing, utameh ad ha'arev, and remains in a state of ritual impurity until the evening. Okay, so anyone who has any kind of contact with the carcasses of these unkosher animals, now he himself enters this state of uncleanliness. And it's the same word as we saw for the clean and the unclean animals. Okay, tameh and tahor in Hebrew. So they're the animals that are clean and unclean. And then if we touch the carcasses of any of these unclean animals, we ourselves become temporarily unclean. But we can get out of this state of being temporarily unclean, temporarily being icky, just as these animals are supposed to be detestable for us or icky to us. So now we become icky, but the difference is we can get out of it. How do we get out of it? We wash our clothes, and then when the sun sets, we exit this state of being icky, of being disgusting from coming in contact with these carcasses. So imagine, all right, one of the things that I really want to try to get across is that that these laws are very logical, because the rabbis, they love to say that there's no logic to these laws, that these are what they call chukim. Chukim are unexplainable laws. That's baloney, and that actually makes Yahweh look arbitrary. It makes him look like a fool instead of a wise God. It makes him look like he just takes arbitrary laws and imposes them upon his servants, his fearful servants, and we have no choice but to do them because he's God and we're human beings, and that's the end of it. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's one of the things that I love about studying the book of Leviticus is to see the logic in it, is to see that it makes actual common sense, and to see that the rabbis are wrong. And actually, they are not only they're wrong, they are insulting Yahweh by saying that he gives laws that have no logic to them whatsoever, that they just are the way they are because that's the way they are, and that's the end of it. Okay, so let's think about it for a second. Okay, imagine, let's take you find a dead, what would be an unkosher animal? You find a dead, let's go with I don't want to use cat or dog. You find a dead rat on your property. Okay, well, we haven't gotten to the rats yet, so maybe we use a larger animal. Let's see, what would be an example? You find a dead, I don't know. Okay, we'll go with rat. Okay, because it really illustrates the point. And you pick it up and you move it because you want to get it off your property, or you want to get it off your your front lawn. And now it makes logical sense that you yourself you've now contracted this ickiness. It's really disgusting. This animal, this dead, detestable animal is now coming in contact with your skin, and you yourself have now contracted this ickiness, these cooties. Okay. Whereas if it were a kosher animal, so let's say you find a dead cow on your front lawn, I don't know how that would happen, but this is a clean animal. This is not a detestable animal. So if you touch it, you don't contract that same uncleanliness. You don't contract that same ickiness. Okay. The animals that are detestable for us to eat, if we touch their carcasses, they pass to us also a state of being temporarily icky. Okay, of having the cooties. All right, let's go on. לכל בהמה אשר היא מפרסת פרסה, ושסה איננה שוסעת, וגרה איננה מעלה, טמאים הם לכם. כל נוגע בהם יטמא. So any animal that has split hooves, but not completely split hooves, I think we saw the example of the camel, V'gera enam ma'aleh, and it does not chew its cud, or does not chew its cud, they are unclean to us, and anyone who touches them also becomes unclean. Okay, so are we speaking about now the dead animal or the live animal? I guess I would say in this case it's a live animal. Okay, so any of these particular animals, if you have contact with them, then you also achieve, or you now enter a state of ritual impurity. וכל הולך על כפהו, וכל החיה ההולכת על ארבע טמאים הם לכם, כל הנוגע בנבלתם יטמע עד הערב. And any animal that walks on its paws, among all of the animals that walk on 4 feet, in other words, it has 4 feet and it walks on those 4 feet, they are also to be considered unclean to us, and anyone who touches their dead bodies becomes also icky, or acquires a state of ritual uncleanliness until the evening. Verse 28. And anyone who lifts up, who carries their carcasses, should wash his clothes and remains in a state of ritual impurity until the evening. Okay, so I think the context here is dead bodies. I think that's what we're talking about here. Okay, I want to read it again. Even though in verse 25 it doesn't explicitly mention, in verse 26 it doesn't explicitly mention that we're talking about dead bodies, I think that the context here from 24 to 28 is all about carcasses. So basically what it's saying is if you touch the carcass of an unclean animal, then you yourself now achieve, or you now acquire, this state of uncleanliness. And we'll talk about the consequences of that. The consequences of that are basically that you cannot go anywhere near the tabernacle when you're in a state of uncleanliness. It doesn't matter. You could walk around anywhere outside of the tabernacle, all over the land of Israel, all over the world, and be in a state of uncleanliness, and it has no consequences. But you could not go into God's house when you're all ickied up, when you're all icked up, when you have the cooties. Okay, so let's read this again. I'll read it in the English actually, just to get a different perspective. I have to plug in a second. So Leviticus 11. Maybe we'll get a little commentary on this. So we're going from 24 to 28. Oops, I got to plug in a second. I don't know why the numbering is different in English, but it doesn't matter. So every animal that does not have a divided hoof, or that does not chew its cud, is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until the evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. These animals are unclean for you. Okay, so I think what we see clearly here in the English, for sure, and if we would go back to the Hebrew, we'd see it as well, obviously, is that we're talking about carcasses. We're talking about dead bodies. And basically what it means is if you touch the dead bodies and this is really speaking about large mammals, okay? If you touch the dead bodies of large mammals and they're unkosher, then you acquire now a state of ritual impurity. I just want to read it one more time for myself in the Hebrew. תטמאו כל הנוגע בנבלתם יטמע עד הערב, כל הנושא מנבלתם יכבס בגדיו וטמא עד הערב, ולכל הבהמה אשר היא מפרסת פרסה ושסה איננה שסעת וגרה איננה מעלה טמאים הם לכם, כל הנוגע בהם יטמע, בכל הולך על כפהו, בכל החיה הולכת על ארבע טמאים הם לכם, כל הנוגע בנבלתם יטמע עד הערב, והנושא את נבלתם יכבס בגדיו וטמא עד הערב, טמאים הם לכם. Okay, so let me point out one or two more other things. So we're talking about the dead bodies. We're talking about the carcasses of large mammals. And what we see are two possibilities. Either you touch the dead carcass, the carcass of that animal, that's hanogea, that means to make contact with, touch. And if so, then you don't have to do anything. You're just in a state of ritual impurity. You're in a state of ickiness until the sun sets. However, if you actually lift up the carcass, let's say you have to move it, right? The cow died on, not the cow, the rat died on your front lawn, and you want to move it off your front lawn. Now you're lifting it up. So now it's not enough just to wait until the evening. You have to wash your clothes, and then when the sun sets, you exit your state of ritual impurity. Okay. So again, when you're lifting it, you're having more contact with it. You're not just touching it, you're lifting it up. Maybe its ickiness is gonna get onto your clothing rather than just if you touch it with your finger or something like that, or by mistake you just step on it or something like that. You're not actually lifting it up. So the requirement to get out of that state of ritual uncleanliness, the requirement to get out of that state of ickiness, now requires the extra action also of washing your clothes. Okay. And I would claim also that what that means is that it doesn't mean that you have to wash your clothes immediately. It basically means that in order for those clothes now to exit their state of ritual impurity, they have to be washed. In other words, if you take those clothes and they haven't been washed and you wear them and then you go to the tabernacle, you entered into that sacred sanctuary, that sacred area, now you have sullied Yahweh's house, and that's a no-no. If you remain outside the sanctuary, if you remain outside the courtyard of the tabernacle, then there's no problem being in a state of ickiness, in a state of ritual impurity. The whole idea of ritual impurity has to do with the tabernacle. That's the main thing here. Okay, if you never plan on going to the tabernacle, okay, then you don't have to worry about the state of ritual impurity or impurity, ritual purity or impurity. Okay. The second, I've got to plug in. So let me do that right now. Let me plug in. I'm just gonna pause for a second. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So the main thing to remember when we're going through this topic is the golden rule, or the big no is that the unclean cannot come in contact with the holy. So there are these two orthogonal, if you know what that word means, these two kind of like separate but crisscrossing concepts. There's the holy and the profane. So for instance, let me just bring up the picture again. Okay, so here's our map of the tabernacle. Let's make sure I'm sharing this, that we use each week, which is a good one. Come on. Okay, there's our map of the tabernacle. And we see the tabernacle courtyard. And for this definition, anything within the tabernacle courtyard is considered the holy area. Okay? Anything, anywhere else in the entire world, well, that's not exactly true because there are some things that are dedicated to the temple, but in terms of places, okay, anything outside of the tabernacle courtyard is considered profane anywhere in the world. Okay? And so the holy is inside the tabernacle courtyard. The profane, the non-holy, is outside the tabernacle courtyard. Okay, and then we have the concept of tameh and tahor, of tahor and tameh. Tahor meaning clean or being in a state of ritual purity, they sometimes like to call it, and tameh meaning being unclean or in a state of ritual impurity. Okay, and the rule is this: the only big no-no, the only no-no here is that the tameh cannot come in contact with the kadosh. The impure cannot come in contact with the holy. Okay, so if we make a little box, right? Think of a 2x2 box. Across the top, you have two columns, holy and profane, and you have two rows, clean and unclean. Actually, let's even do it. Let's see how we can do this. We could do it in Google spreadsheet, just to really illustrate the point, because it is the key point for everything we're going to be studying in Leviticus, basically to the end of the chapter. Okay, so let's see, where is it? Torah. I'll just do it here. It's really simple, but it's in a super important and profound concept. So let me do a new sheet here. Plus, okay. So let's see what we're going to call this sheet. Rename holy, or okay, holy and impure. Okay, so here we have the states of ritual cleanliness, or here we have, we have the areas. So we have holy and we have profane. And let me make this bigger. Okay, we have holy and profane. Put it over here. And here we have clean, ritually clean, and ritually unclean. So this is what human beings, this is a state that human beings can be in, okay? And this is, let's even define it. Let's see how we're going to do this. Holy, I'll put our definitions down here, okay? Clean versus unclean. These are states that human beings can be in. And then we have holy for these, for our definition here. Let me just make sure this is being picked up on the screen. It is. For our definition here, holy means any place within the tabernacle / temple courtyard, or any foods dedicated to Yahweh. Okay? And profane, you know what? I don't want to, I'm just going to stick with place for now. Let me just leave it like this. So we can talk about that separately. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So any place within the temple courtyard, and profane means any place out in the world outside of the tabernacle. I'll just leave this tabernacle. Again, I want to keep things simple here. Courtyard. The word temple. It's implied. Okay, so those are definitions. And the rule is like this. This is a, let's get a check and an X. There we go. There's our check. Okay. Okay. So if you're in a holy place and you're in a state of ritual cleanliness, and let me just add the word ritual here. And I'm going to put that in parentheses because, again, that's just the way it's usually translated. I don't really like that translation, but we're going with it. Okay. So if you're clean and you're in a holy place, you're okay. You're good to go. Whoa. Do this a little bit differently. Okay. You're good to go. If you're clean and you're in a profane place, no problem. Okay. Kal v'chomer, if you know what that means. If you're unclean and you're in a profane place, meaning you're in a state of ritual uncleanliness, you've just touched the carcass of a rat, but you're in, Haifa or Arizona or China, not a problem. Okay? This is the big no-no. And let's get our red X. Okay, good enough. Okay, this right there, that's the big no-no. If you're in a state of ritual uncleanliness and you enter the holy sanctuary, you enter the holy province, which again is, for our definitions here, anywhere within the tabernacle courtyard, then you've done a big no-no. You have sullied the house of Yahweh. And this, if it continues to happen, this is going to cause Yahweh to say, listen, I don't ask for much, but I just ask you to keep my house clean. If I can't even get the house clean, the housekeeper's job around here, I'm out of here. I'm a clean, honest, straightforward kind of guy. And if you cannot, kind of God, and if you cannot even keep my house clean, then I'm not going to live in it. I'm taking off. I'm moving out. Okay, so that's it. And everything we're going to be speaking about, more or less from here until the end of Leviticus, with some rare exceptions, has to do with this issue about avoiding this situation, this no-no, of making sure that the unclean does not come in contact with the holy, that something that's in a ritual state of uncleanliness does not enter anywhere near or enter within the courtyard of the tabernacle. And in fact, when we get to Leviticus 16, which has to do with Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, we're going to see that really the essence of Yom Kippurim is not about personal atonement for our sins. It's about atoning for any inadvertent times or even deliberate times that this might have happened, that the unclean came in contact with the holy. It's basically a house cleaning ritual for the tabernacle. That's really what Yom Kippurim originally was. And secondarily, it has to do with personal atonement for personal sins. Okay. Any questions, any comments? All right, let's go on. I want to get a little bit of commentary on this. Let's bring up the usual suspects. We'll do a little Robert Alter on this one. Okay, so keep this in mind. This right here is key. This is absolutely key. And if you understand this, you'll understand what's going on pretty much for the rest of the book of Leviticus. Okay, so let's grab Robert Alter and see what he has to say. Get a little insight from him. So we're in Leviticus 11. $28. 8. Okay. Okay. Focus, and these will become unclean. Okay. There. Okay. Okay, so verse 24. Again, all the numbering is different. In Hebrew, it's 24. So he does 24. Okay, so whoever touches their carcass shall become unclean. It is a dead, unclean animal that conveys this impurity by touch, not the living one. Abraham ibn Ezra, one of my favorite commentators, who's Karaite leaning, but definitely rabbinical, expresses indignation against the Sadducees for imagining that living animals are included. So the Sadducees are the spiritual progenitors of the Karaites, but just like the Karaites, especially the Egyptian Karaites, doesn't mean they're always right. And I don't know exactly where this. I don't know exactly where he's getting the idea that the Sadducees believe this. But if that is the case, then I agree with the Ibn Ezra. This is not speaking about live animals. You can pet your dogs, you can pet your cats, you can pet your pet rat, your pet gerbil, and it's not going to put you in a state of ritual impurity, okay, of uncleanliness. Dead bodies of any sort impart ritual impurity, but in the present case, because a dead animal is potential food, the uncleanliness inhering in the prohibited creature assumes an especially dangerous potency. It is imagined as a source of contamination transmitted by physical contiguity rather than a physical contagion. Okay. Okay. So I think he really summarizes it very nicely. Because one could claim it's a bit ambiguous because of verse 26. I won't get into the details in Hebrew, but I think it's clear from the context here that we're talking about dead animals and we're talking about dead unkosher large mammals, that they are what impart ritual impurity. So not petting your dog, not petting your cat, but touching the carcass of a dead unkosher animal. And then he goes on to say, whoever bears off anything of their carcass, it's a strange way to translate it. It basically means whoever carries away their carcass or transports their carcass. As several medieval commentators note, the act of carrying off part of the carcass necessarily involves closer and more sustained contact with the source of impurity, and so it requires laundering of the garments as well as bathing. And that's exactly what we spoke about, right? When you carry, it's the difference between just touching the carcass of an unkosher animal and then taking that carcass, lifting it up and carrying it away, right? It's little, who knows, little pieces of it. Cooties are going to get onto your clothes. 1 second, please. So just try to call. I have to quit out of this app. Little pieces of it may get onto your clothes, or it's just as Robert Alter is pointing out, it's more sustained contact. So then, when that's the case, when you haven't just touched it, but you've actually carried away, you've moved the carcass, then you have this extra added step of you also have to wash your clothes. Okay, the clothes have become ritually unclean, and they have to be washed as well. And other than that, you just wait until the evening, and then for the human being, it just magically disappears. The human being doesn't have to bathe himself or anything like this. This is not considered a very severe form of contraction of ritual impurity. We're going to see that there's a hierarchy to levels of ritual impurity that human beings can contract, and the more severe the higher the hierarchy, or the more severe that the situation is, then the more that the human being has to do to get himself out of that state of ritual impurity. The most severe being contact with a dead human body, which we'll get to. Okay. So that's that. So these 4 verses here have to do with coming in contact with the carcass, the dead body of an unclean, of an unkosher animal. And really, it's speaking here not about insects. It's really speaking about, I think from the context here is that it's certainly speaking about mammals, maybe also about birds. I don't even really think it's speaking about fishes, because fish in general we've seen are kind of excluded. There's no explicit prohibition from eating the blood of fish. That prohibition about eating an animal's blood, I'm now almost 100% convinced, only applies to mammals and to birds. It doesn't apply to fish. Okay, verse 29, let's go on. V'zelechem atamei b'sheretz ashoretz ala aretz. So now we have different types of animals. So these are, again, there's our word sheretz. We know what sheretz means. Remember our 2 words, sheretz and sheketz. Sheretz means swarm, or move in groups, or sometimes just means kind of like, slither. So in this case, I think I'm going to go with the word slither, okay? Because I don't think it, here they say among the creeping. So I don't think it necessarily implies swarming. I think it implies in this case, slithering or scurrying. So a good friend of mine, he's a messenger in New York City. That's the work he does, and wherever he goes into the subway stations there, I don't know about whenever, but a lot of times he'll see like rats just like scurrying all over the place. And he always says that I saw the rats scurry. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Okay, so these are speaking about things that swarm, and we're speaking about small mammals here. Okay, so we covered. Let's just go back and see what we covered. We covered the large mammals, the large land mammals. We covered the yes, we covered the sea creatures, the fish. Then we covered the birds, and then we covered the flying insects. Okay, so those are the 4 animal types that we've covered so far. Now we're going to get to the smaller land animals, and we'll be given specific examples of what we're talking about. And now we go back to, so now this is the first time, and for now the last time, that we spoke about human beings contracting ritual impurity. And we saw that they contract the ritual impurity from coming in contact with any of these dead bodies. And again, the different types we had were the large land mammals, the sea creatures, and the the birds and other flying mammals or other flying larger animals, and then the flying insects. Excuse me. And then we, as I said, then we saw that if you come in contact with the dead bodies of, I don't think it includes all these animals, I don't think it includes the insects, but of the larger animals for sure, and that's a different discussion, which I'm not going to have now, then you become ritually impure. If you just touch it, then it's until the evening. If you lift the carcass, then you also have to wash your clothes. Now we get back to other types of animals which are unkosher, which are considered unclean to us. And these are the smaller land animals. So this, for you, shall be unclean, shall be kosher, shall be unacceptable, shall be detestable. Well, I don't want to use the word detestable because we're using that for shekets. These are the unacceptable things, the unclean things for you among the animals that slither, the slithering things that slither on the land. And then we have examples. And again, I'm just going to go with the standard translations here. Acholed, which is translated as the mole in modern Hebrew, and actually maybe in ancient Hebrew. The word chulda, or at least in modern Hebrew, the word chulda is a rat. So it's related to that word, choled, chulda. Ha'achbar is the mouse. And in fact, the mouse that you use on the computer, they also call it in modern Hebrew the achbar. Hatzav, that's the turtle. here they translate as large lizard. In modern Hebrew, tzav is turtle. Okay, so we're going to go with their translation. So we have the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard, liminehu, and things that are like it. Okay, so we're getting an idea of the types of things we're talking about. So choled, the mole, that's an animal, small mammal that scurries along the ground. The mouse, the same thing. The large lizard, the lizard is not a mammal, it's a reptile. Okay, so it's not just including mammals, it's including any types of animals that are around that size and that slither or scurry along the face of the earth. Okay, now we get more. Ha'anaka, that's translated here as the gecko, so another type of lizard. Hakoach, this is translated here as the monitor lizard. Halita'ah, and that's the way you say lizard in modern Hebrew, those lizards that like to crawl on the wall in Israel. That's the lita'ah, but here they translate it as the sand reptile. Achomet, the sand lizard. So we're talking about all different types of lizard. Ba'atin shemet, the chameleon, and that's also in modern Hebrew. Okay, so we get the idea. These are all reptiles. Okay, ela atmeim lachem b'chol sheretz kol hanogeh behem b'motam yitma ad ha'arev. So those are the animals that are unacceptable, that are unclean to you, meaning you're not allowed to eat them. And then we also get anyone who touches them while they're dead in their deaths is unclean until the evening. So it's that same rule. Okay, it's that same rule, but now it's being applied to things like the mouse, the rat, the lizard. Well, not the rat explicitly. The mole, the mouse, the lizards, various types of lizards, chameleon. Get the idea, right? Basically, small mammals and reptiles. That kind of size thing. And notice that one important thing to notice is that the Torah doesn't categorize animals specifically by species or even by what kingdom they belong to. We saw in the case of the birds, of the flying things, we had a whole bunch of different birds that were listed. And at the end, we had the atalef, the bat. The bat is a mammal. So the Torah really classifies things according to, let's say, their utility or their habits, as well as their size. And that's why I've been very careful to point out that here, this is not speaking about just mammals. It's speaking about large land mammals. Okay, this is not speaking just about fish. This is speaking pretty much about all sea creatures, anything in the sea. This is not speaking just about birds. It's speaking about birds and other things that might seem like birds, like bats, right? Things that fly, that are around that size, that fly in the sky. But it's not speaking about little flying insects like mosquitoes or flies, right? Because they're not that same size. So it's really categorizing by, let's say, place, function, and size, more or less. That's the way the Torah is breaking down the entire animal world. Okay. Okay. I think I used the word kingdom technically incorrectly. It doesn't matter. Okay. And now we're talking about these are flying insects. Then here we get to small land animals that scurry or slither or swarm on the land, really scurry or slither. Okay, so just like the larger animals, if you have contact with their dead bodies, if you have contact with their carcasses, then you are unclean until the evening. Verse 32. Check in to see if there are any comments. Okay. So if you have contact with their carcasses, you're unclean until the evening, meaning you don't have to do anything. You just wait for the sun to go down and magically your ickiness, your cooties disappear. Okay. But while you're in the state of cooties, just to remind you the key here, you cannot go into the holy area. You cannot go into the tabernacle courtyard. Okay. If you do, you've profaned Yahweh's house. Okay. Verse 32, V'chol asher yipol allow mehem b'motam yitma mikol kli etz o bered o or o sak kol kli asher ye'aseh milacha b'hem. Let me translate that up to that first part of the verse. Remember, as I always like to point out, this little symbol here, this little wishbone symbol that you see right there, that's called an nach. Or in Ashkenazi Hebrew, nachta, but an nach is really what it is. And that is like a semicolon. Almost every verse in the Torah is divided into two versets, into two half verses, separated or denoted, the separation denoted by that little wishbone that little wishbone looking thingy there. So v'chol asher, so any kol asher yipol allow mehem, so into which any, I'll just paraphrase, if any of these things, these small land animals fall onto something, bimotam, while they're dead, meaning these if any of the carcasses of these land animals, these small land animals fall onto something, then itma, then it becomes impure. So now we're not talking about human beings becoming impure, we're talking about things becoming impure. Okay, above, we saw that if a human being touches or moves the carcass of one of these unkosher animals, then he himself, the human being, becomes impure, becomes a state of ritual impurity. We also saw his clothes. If he lifts it, the clothes enter a state of ritual impurity. Here, we're talking about things. We're talking about vessels, basically, and we're going to be given specific examples. Where is it? Where were we? Right. Cool. So, mikol kli eitz, so any wooden vessel, like let's say a wooden bowl or something like that. So any wooden vessel, or beged, piece of clothing, or that's leather. So anything made out of leather, or sock. Sock is basically, that's where we get the modern English word sack. It's basically, I'm not sure exactly what substance they made sack out of, but anything that was a bag, a sack, like a big potato sack. So any vessel or any item which is used to do work with. Okay, so all these are examples of things that are used throughout the day to either do work or that are used for a specific purpose. So wooden vessels, clothing, leather garments, or leather or other leather things, or sacks. Okay, so any of these things which can be used for doing your daily tasks, for doing work. Okay. So so if that's the case, so if you're eating your Cheerios in a wooden bowl, and all of a sudden out of your drop ceiling falls a dead rat. I hope that doesn't happen to anyone here, but if it does, and it falls right into your bowl of Cheerios, in your wooden bowl of Cheerios. By the way, we're going to see distinction later between wooden bowls and stone bowls. Okay, but in this case, wooden bowls, wood is porous. So if it falls into your wooden bowl while you're eating your Cheerios, then that bowl now enters a state of ritual impurity. It now becomes unclean. You don't have to throw it out, because it's not a severe state of ritual impurity. We'll see other cases in the future where you do actually have to. But what do you have to do? You have to wash it in water. Literally, it's to be brought through water, pass through water, and then it remains in a state of ritual impurity until the sun sets, and then it becomes clean. So basically, you have to wash it and wait for the sun to set. And then these various vessels, the examples of which were given, then will return to a state of ritual purity. Okay? And here we have I'm sorry, I should say that really wood is not porous, okay, if it's been finished or treated, okay? So here we have another example, and if the same thing happens, to paraphrase, if the same thing happens with a kli cheres, what is a kli cheres? A kli cheres is earthenware, okay? And in ancient times, it was porous. They didn't always paint it or treat it, or I guess put it in a kiln. I'm trying to now remember what the entire process is. But when you have like a just pottery that hasn't been treated, then it's porous. Okay, it's kind of like whatever falls on it is going to like sink into it. Okay, so so if the same thing happens to an earthenware vessel, a porous earthenware vessel, so anything that is in this earthenware vessel now becomes unclean, and the earthenware vessel itself you have to shatter, you have to break, you have to destroy. Okay, so again, now imagine you're sitting there, and instead of eating in a wooden vessel, which has been sanded and finished, and so nothing can really penetrate into it, you're eating in an unglazed earthenware vessel. So what would be an example? I don't know, just clay. You take clay and you just let it dry, and you shape that into a bowl. That is now your earthenware vessel. It's porous, okay? And you're sitting there, you're eating your Cheerios or your Special K or whatever, and all of a sudden, out of your drop ceiling, falls a rat and lands right in your Cheerios. So what this is saying is now the Cheerios become impure, so you have to get rid of them, and the vessel itself becomes impure, but now it has to be destroyed. It's not like the earthenware vessels or the other things that were mentioned, the clothing or the sack or the leather. This is an earthenware vessel. It's porous. The cooties sink right into the earthenware vessel, and now it has to be destroyed. Okay? Verse 34. Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel asher yavo alau mayim yitma v'chol mashke asher yishate b'chol kli yitma. Okay, so now we're talking about, so we were just speaking about an earthenware vessel, and now it gives us two types of food. So any type of food, asher yavo alav mayim, which is moist, I think is what they're trying to say here. I'll get a couple translations and commentaries, but anything that can be placed upon it water. So it's wet. It basically means moist food, and I'll tell you why I think there's a difference between moist food and unmoist food in a second, although it should already be obvious. And any drink which a person drinks, which is to be drunk. Okay, so whatever, your orange juice, your Coca-Cola, your wine, itma. Okay, no matter what in what vessel it is, it becomes unclean. So let's talk about this for a second. Okay, so now we had different types of vessels. So up here we were talking about the vessels. Okay. One second. So we're talking about verses 32 and 33. We're talking about the different types of vessels. So if the dead rat falls, let me just see one thing. Yes. So here we're talking about the different types of vessels, and we have the vessels separated into two types. We have the types which, not only vessels, but items which we could say are not porous or can be cured of their impurity. And the examples were given in the case of specifically, we'll use the example of a bowl, was a wooden bowl. So that can be washed and it doesn't have to be destroyed. Then we went on to earthenware vessels. They're porous if they're not glazed. And so the cooties sink right in, and that earthenware vessel has to be destroyed. Now in verse 34, we're talking about the food that were in those vessels. So now we're not talking about the vessels themselves, but the food that was in the vessel. So you're sitting there again, eating your porridge, eating your grits. I always like to make fun, lightly tease, I'll say, my southern friends. So you're sitting there eating your grits, okay? Your grits are moist, okay? So if a rat falls in them, then the cooties spread throughout, right? They're liquid, like I don't have to really explain too much. It makes perfect sense. Or you're drinking your Coca-Cola, and the rat falls in the Coca-Cola, you want to throw out all the Coca-Cola. But if it's a dry food, so let's say you're eating, you're eating, you have a bag of Doritos in your vessel. Doesn't matter what type of vessel it is. The vessel is a separate issue. If it's a wooden vessel, it can be washed. If it's a earthenware vessel, it has to be destroyed. Now we're talking about the food that's in the vessel. So you have your cheese doodles in the vessel. Those are solid, and so you don't have to throw out all your cheese doodles. You can just take the part of the cheese doodles that were touched by the animal, throw them out, and you can eat the rest of the cheese doodles. But if you're drinking your Coca-Cola, or you're eating your soup or something like that, or let's say your curry, your chickpea curry, which is wet and moist. So if the rat falls in it, then it kind of it spreads through the liquid. Liquid is mobile; it's not solid, right? You can't separate out different parts of the liquid. So now all of the food in that case, if it's liquid or if it's a drink, all of the food becomes yitma, becomes impure, meaning throw it out. Okay. Let's go on to verse 35. So these are some very technical laws, but they're very logical when you really think about it. Okay. Any questions, any comments so far of where we're up to? Anybody? No? All right, so let's move on. Verse 35, allow itma. So now we're talking about other things which these small land animals might fall on. These dead small land animals might fall on, and they become unclean. They become rich. They become detestable or disgusting or basically unacceptable. So we have tanur. So tanur is an oven. Karaiim. Karaiim is a cooking stove. So in modern Hebrew, it's a stovetop. Utats. And they're again to be basically destroyed. Tmeim hem, utmeim yu'ulechem. They've now become impure, unclean, and there's no saving them. Okay, so let's talk about for a second. So let's talk about an oven very briefly. So in ancient times, an oven was not, something that you go to the Best Buy or whatever, to the Costco, and it's made out of metal and all this kind of stuff. Ovens in ancient times were, as you still sometimes will see today, they were basically made out of either clay or they were made out of stone. I sometimes go to an Indian restaurant called Clay Oven, and that's exactly what they do. To this day, it's traditional to make ovens out of clay. You can see this on the internet. So let's even see a picture of a clay oven. So it's basically an earthenware vessel. It's like a large earthenware vessel, clay oven. There we go. So there's a picture of a clay oven. Okay, you can see it looks like a pizza oven, except it's made out of clay. That's traditionally the way ovens were made. They were made out of either stone or clay, but really clay, because the clay, if you make it out of stone, you'll have places where the heat can escape. So often they were made out of clay because it holds in the heat, right? There's no gaps in between the clay. And it's basically a large earthenware vessel. So it's like the rule for an earthenware vessel. If a dead rat falls on it or it crawls in it or something like that, it's not going to crawl in, it's dead. But if it falls on top of it, then it's like a large earthenware vessel. It has to be destroyed. So that's what we're talking about, okay? So the word in Hebrew, by the way, is tanur. I'll just point something out. Tanur, without any doubt whatsoever, can be linked to the modern English word furnace. And I will show you some examples of that. I'll show you some proofs of that. So tanur, the word tanur is oven, but it really means this thing that we're looking at here. Okay, that's what an oven was in ancient times. And if you've ever eaten Indian food, you may have heard of something like tandoori chicken. Tandoori chicken. So what does tandoori chicken mean? It means chicken that's cooked in a clay oven, because so it was Sanskrit, now Hindi, or maybe Punjabi, maybe Urdu, all of these languages from the Indian subcontinent and thereabouts. The word tandoor in those languages is tanur. Ancient Hebrew is tandoor, and so that's where you get tandoori chicken. It basically means tanur, chicken that's cooked in a clay oven. Okay, so if you look at the word tanur, we can find, let's see, Latin for oven. There we go. Furnus. Okay. So the word tanur became in Latin, the t changed to a f, because the f, it's all in the same general area of the mouth. If you think about it, the f, that's a common transition. So tanur became fanur, became furnus. Okay, furnus, that's oven. Let me make this larger. That's oven in Latin. That's one of the words for oven in Latin. So tanur is related to the Latin word furnus, and that's where you get words such as in Portuguese, the word for oven is forno. In Spanish, it's horno, because you have from Portuguese to Spanish, you have you'll have an F to H transition. So for instance, in Portuguese, the word for speak is falar, and in Spanish, it's hablar. So the F becomes a H, In Portuguese, an oven is a forno. In Spanish, it's a horno. Again, that f to h transition. And of course, this word fornus is related to the modern English word furnace. I don't even have to look up the etymology. It's clear, right? So the modern English word furnace, which is like an oven, right? We don't use it in the sense of an oven anymore. We use it in the sense of something that heats our homes. But the modern English word furnace can be traced back ultimately to the Latin, not ultimately, but can be traced back to the Latin furnace, which means an oven, which can be traced back to the Hebrew tanur, which is related to the Sanskrit tandoor, or the modern Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu word tandoor, okay, which means, again, tandoori chicken cooked in an oven, which means specifically in ancient times, this type of oven. That's the same type of oven that we're speaking about right here, this tanur. And that's why if a dead rat falls on top of it, we're not talking about, again, a metal oven that you get from Costco. We're talking about one of these clay ovens, which is basically like a giant earthenware vessel, right? It's made of earthenware, and you can see it's not glazed. It's porous. And so therefore, if one of these dead small land animals falls on it, then it has to be destroyed. And the same with Qara'im. So Qara'im is not an oven. It's like a stovetop, like an ancient stovetop. Basically, let's see if we can find a picture of it. I can't find a picture of it right now, but you can imagine, okay, that it would be the same. It would be the same kind of thing where they would have a fire underneath, and they would have some kind of earthenware table above, and they would put pots or pans or whatever they're going to cook on top of that, or maybe the food on it directly. And it also would be made out of earthenware, so it has to be destroyed. It should be broken to pieces. Tmeim hem, they become impure, they become unclean. Tmeim yi'ulechem, and they should be considered unclean to you, meaning there's no way to get them out of that ritual uncleanliness that they've attracted, because they are earthenware. They're unglazed earthenware. Okay, so that's what's going on there. So we're getting a lot of, like a pizza oven, exactly, Paul, right? Except made out of a clay oven, right? Okay, so we're getting a lot of rules, but they make sense. This is one of the things that I really, really, really want to point out, that all of this makes sense. It's logical. Why, when a dead rat falls on a wooden vessel, can I just wash it? But if it falls on an earthenware vessel, I have to destroy it, because the wooden vessel is not porous if it's been glazed, if it's been treated, whereas and that's the way they did it in ancient times, whereas the earthenware vessel that has not been glazed is porous, and the cooties will just, infuse into it, will be soaked up into it. The same with food. If it's solid food, then I can just, if it falls on my rice, I just take those little areas of rice, throw them out. Or on my nacho chips, I just take those couple of nacho chips, throw it out along with the rat. But if it's a soup, or if it's a stew, then I've got to throw the whole thing out. Okay, let's go on. Verse 36. Okay. Let me just close the curtains here. It's sun shining right in my eyes. Okay. One second. Forget it. Right. Okay. Well, we'll change position in a couple minutes. Just move up a little bit. Okay. So, mayanu bor mikber maimi etahor unagev benivlatam yitma. Okay. So let's say now it falls into a well or a spring, okay, where water gathers. So mayan, let me just get the translations here. Mayan, they translate as a spring. Bor, they translate as a cistern, okay? So spring or cistern, where water gathers, yet tahor. So it remains pure. Why? What's the logic behind that? The logic behind that is that the water's flowing. If it's a spring, it's not just like stagnant water. If it were just stagnant water, then yes, you could say, well, all of that water now becomes impure, like when it fell into the drink. If you're drinking your, your wine and a lizard falls into it, that's it. You throw out all of the wine. But if you're talking about a cistern, or you're talking about a well, I guess, or a spring, then this is water that's constantly moving. So it's not going to become, it's not stagnant, right? It's the animal that fell into it is not going to permanently infect the water. It can just be removed, and the water just keeps on flowing, right? And anyone who touches the carcasses, and let me just see one thing. Okay, 1 second. I just want to see one thing. This is 36. Okay, I guess this is reiterating. Anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. Okay, fine. So I guess this is reiterating, or maybe it's saying in this case, okay, if you have to go now, grab the dead rat out of your well, then it's reminding, the Torah is reminding us here that you become unclean. Okay, if you have any contact with those dead carcasses. Verse 37, V'chi yipol minivlatam al kol zera zerua asher yizara tahorhu. So if it falls on seed, so let's say you have a seed pile, you're going to go out and you're going to plant your wheat, and you have all your seeds gathered, but it's just a dry seed pile. Just 1 second. Then it doesn't affect the seed pile. Okay. But if you've already added water to the seeds and the carcass falls on them, then it's considered impure. Okay, so why would you add water to the seeds? Maybe it's implying that you've already left them on the ground and watered them. So again, this water, because it's liquid, kind of allows things to move around, and allows this ickiness to move around and get soaked up more readily. Okay, let's get a little commentary on these. Oh, I think we're freezing. Uh-oh, there we go. All right, I'm not even going to wait. I'm going to restart the computer right now. I know what this means. Okay, we're back. Yep, froze up and I got out immediately and now I'm back in. Let me share the screen. Okay. So I think I want to get to the end of Leviticus 11 at least so we can start on 12 next time. So let me just get a little commentary on that. And then I think I'm just going to read through pretty quickly to the end because I want to end in about 20 minutes, half an hour at the latest. So let's get a little commentary on some of these verses here. Go to Robert Alter, our old friend. Oh. Okay. Just get some commentary here. This will pick it up here. This isn't. Second. All right. I think I'm going to read here. No, let's go back down to where we were. Okay. Whatever goes on its pause. So that's in Leviticus, or that's in verse. So that's how he translates this, these small land animals. And let's read what he has to say there. This category of prohibition is, of course, already implied in the earlier stipulation regarding split hooves, but the priestly writers seem to seek to make the classes of prescribed animals as clear and explicit as possible. I disagree with Robert Alter on this one. Again, I think that animals are not split up necessarily by whether they're mammals or amphibians. They're split up by size and habitat. So small land animals, large land animals, sea animals, etc. Okay. So now this is when something falls. Here and in the subsequent verses, the notion of contamination through contact is extended. Impurity is imparted not only to a person when he or she reaches out to touch or pick up the carcass of a forbidden creature, but also when any part of the carcass, say a piece of a decaying bird whose body is lodged in a tree. Okay, I gave the example of a rat falling from a drop ceiling, but I guess this example is a little bit nicer. Comes in, maybe not as relevant, but nicer. Comes in contact with any substance, porous substances, and here he goes, he points this out as well, porous substances that can be suffused with water in immersion. Wood, cloth, skin, sackcloth can be purified of contamination through immersion. Earthen vessels which are porous but cannot be saturated must be destroyed. So he kind of says the opposite. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that. So he's saying wood, cloth, skin, sackcloth, these are all porous, so they can be cleaned. Like in a washing machine. Interesting. I'd always thought of it the other way. And he's saying that earthenware, it's just porous, but it cannot be saturated, meaning it can't be cleaned through without, must be destroyed. Okay, interesting. I think actually that makes a lot of sense. Okay. This clause looks suspiciously out of place. I thought the same thing when I read it. Perhaps an inadvertent scribal repetition from above. I also thought exactly the same thing when I came across it. That's in verse 36. This here, v'nogeh b'nivlatam yitma, this does seem completely out of place. And I think it's a fair comment, a good comment. Okay, now we're talking about the seeds. Should water be put on the seed? This stipulation is an especially vivid illustration of how impurity is imagined as a contagion in quasi-medical terms. Dry planted seed in the ground is deemed part of the natural growing world and resistant to contamination. Wet, softened seed becomes permeable to the contaminating substance. So again, Robert Alter is saying that he's already talking about seed that's in the ground. And here, whether it's dry, I guess it's been planted but hasn't been watered, or maybe it hasn't rained yet, then that's one thing. But if it's wet, softened seed, then again, it becomes permeable. So the essence here is whether it's dry and non-permeable, separated out, able to separate out. Again, the example I gave is between the plate of Doritos and the plate of and the bowl of stew, right? And then wet and softened. I don't know. This one I'd have to look into a little bit more to see exactly what they're saying, but that's his opinion on it. Okay. And that's what we're up to, right? So we didn't get up to 39 yet. We did not get up to 39. Let me read a couple of his other comments, some of his earlier comments from this chapter, because I think some of them are really important. So this, I think we read last week. So here he says for verses 5 and 6, already at this point in the list, there is some uncertainty about the identity of the animals named in the Hebrew. I've alluded to that a bunch of times, right? We don't 100% know what these animals are. And this uncertainty grows as the text moves on to birds, amphibians, reptiles, and insects. See the comment on Deuteronomy 14, 7-19, the use in translation of relatively rare zoological designations such as gecko and skink jibes with the puzzlement that many of the Hebrew terms elicit. So basically he's saying what we spoke about, that really nobody knows exactly what these animal names mean in modern terms, don't know exactly what species they're referring to, and a lot of different researchers, scholars, academics come up with different ideas. Okay. The pig. It is only later in the Hellenistic period that the pig becomes the prohibited animal par excellence. Although the anonymous prophet of the Babylonian exile, whose words are recorded in Isaiah 66:17, brackets eaters of pig and rat as participants in some unspeakable rite, pagan rite. Pork was a common food among the Philistines and was also sometimes eaten by the Canaanites, as archaeological inspection of the bones of animals consumed has determined. Interestingly, in the high country in the eastern part of Canaan, where Israelite population was concentrated toward the end of the second millennium BCE, the percentage of pig bones discovered is only a fraction of what it is in the Canaanite lowlands. This suggests that the taboo was already generally embraced by the Israelites in an early period. This is his kind of academic, secular point of view. So we'll just skip that. So that have no fins or scales. So anything that doesn't have fins or scales, we know is unkosher. Mary Douglas, whoever that is, wasn't she like one of the pilgrims that came on the Mayflower? I don't know. Sounds like it. Has proposed. Has proposed that what underlies the dietary prohibitions is general commitment of the Israelite mindset to clear and distinct categories, forms of animal life that appear to be ambiguous instances of their particular zoological class may not be eaten. That's a little bit ridiculous. Oh, I see what she's saying. I'm just going to skip this. Some of our kind of argument is more positive, perhaps over India. Fish present the example of kind of denizens of the water, yet sea swarms or pollutates, shorets with polymorphous creatures and shells and plasmic blobs and tentacles seem altogether unlike fish. Pollution. Okay. And I'm going to skip that. Let me see if there's anything here. It is noteworthy that terms from the creation story abound here: swarming creatures, according to its kind, gathering of water, sturds, romeset, crawling. The dietary laws are framed to make a statement about the Israelites placed in the created order of things that is a kind of qualifying addendum to the priestly panorama of creation in Genesis 1. That's that is secular again approach. We're not even going to get into that. Okay, God's fecund world calls all sorts of living creatures into existence, and man is one of these, but the Israelites are expected to set themselves apart from the natural world to which they belong, just as they are required to set themselves apart from the nations with which, of necessity, they participate in political, economic, and cultural intercourse. Thus, they are forbidden the flesh of whole classes of living creatures, especially when animal life seems to manifest its most intense category, dissolving pullulation. One may wonder whether behind all this, at least for sea creatures, reptiles, insects, and amphibians, there's some sort of horror. Okay, he's just going off, and I'm not going to get into that right now. Okay. And I think we read all of this stuff. Okay, let's try to get to the end of Leviticus 11 so that we can pick it up in Leviticus 12 next week, and then we're going to end the study for today. So I'm going to go into what I like to call express mode. I'm going to give minimal commentary, and we'll just get through the end of Leviticus 11, and you can follow along in English or whatever language you want. And so let's do that. We are in verse 37. No, we did that already. That's with the seeds. וכי ימות מן הבהמה אשר היא לכם לאכלה, הנוגע בנבלתה יטמע עד הערב. So we're talking about the large land animals. If you touch the carcass of a large animal, of a large land animal, then you remain unclean until the evening. So any dead carcass, any carcass of a large land animal that you touch, you remain unclean until the evening. Let me just see something here. Okay, and let's see what Robert Alter says about that. So even the carcass of a permitted animal, which has died rather than been deliberately slaughtered, conveys impurity. Milgram, noting the horror of the dead body, invoking the ban on consuming blood and eating a kid boiled in its mother's milk, argues that the dietary prohibitions are an affirmation of life over death. Okay, we won't get into that. And anyone who eats the carcass of a permitted animal, of an animal that died on its own, basically. So if you eat roadkill of a kosher animal, which you're really not allowed to do, but if you do it, then you have to wash your clothing because you came in close contact with it. You're not just touching it, you're eating it, and you remain unclean until the evening. And the same if you lift it up. Okay, so these are talking about kosher animals. Verse 41. V'chol sheretz, kol sheretz hashoretz, and there's our word sheretz, to sieve, to scurry or crawl or swarm or swim, depending on the context. V'chol sheretz, usually it's translated in its most basic form as swarm, but it means different things depending on the context. V'chol hasheretz, hashoretz ala aretz, sheketz hu lo ye'echel. So this is again speaking about what was these swarming land animals. These are the smaller land animals. The examples we gave from above. Okay, some of them where we saw the different types of lizards, where we saw the mole, where we saw the mouse. Okay, so now it's going to expand a little bit more. So anything that goes on its belly. And the classic example of that is the snake. We saw that in Genesis chapter 3 when the snake is cursed. Ad kol marber raglayim, and anything that has 4 legs or that has lots of legs. So anything that swarms or slithers or scurries along the land. Again, this is really trying to express the idea of small land animals. It doesn't have to be mammals. It could be mammals. It could be reptiles. You're not allowed to eat any small land animals. Okay. Do not eat them because they are detestable to you. There's that word sheketz again. Verse 43. Al Tishakatsu et nafshotechem b'chol ashoretz. So do not make yourselves detestable with any of these creepy crawlies, with any of these small land animals that scurry, slither, dart across the land. V'lo titma'u behem v'nitmetem behem. And by the way, I think this would also include things like cats and dogs. Maybe not dogs, maybe cats. And do not make yourselves unclean through them or become and thereby become unclean. Verse 44. Ki ani Yahweh Elohechem, Wahit kadishtem. I am Yahweh your God, and you shall make yourselves holy. Va'itim kadoshim, and you shall become holy. You shall be holy. Ki kadosh ani, because I am holy. Velo titma'u, and this I think sums up everything in the Torah. Okay, you shall become holy. You shall be holy because I am holy. We are Yahweh's chosen nation, and we are to encapsulate. We're to emulate Him more than any other nation. We are to be His representatives, to emulate His ways in our special covenant with Him, above and beyond any nation. He's holy, so we are required by covenant to be holy. Okay. And do not make yourselves unclean, make yourselves dirty, make yourselves icky, make yourselves disgusting with all of the small animals that scurry across the land. Verse 45. Let's drink a bit more water here. So these are now kind of summary sentences, right? Very typical when the Torah deals with a certain topic. It kind of has introductory sentences, then it gets into the meat and bones of the issue, and then it has summary sentences. And so now we're up to the summary sentences. Because I am Yahweh who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, to be for you a God. So you shall be holy because I am holy. Right? Again, reasserting the special relationship between Yahweh and Israel, and as a basis or as a rationale for why Israel has these special laws that all of humanity should have followed, but Yahweh gave up on all of humanity. God gave up on all of humanity. That's what the flood story is about. And ultimately chose one particular branch of humanity, which is going to be the model branch, to be a model nation and ultimately bring all of humanity back to Yahweh, all of those who remain. Okay. And then we have more summary sentences here. Zot Torah habehema va'of v'kol nefesh hachaya romeset b'mayim. This is the instruction manual. This is a set of instructions for the large land animals, the birds and other similar flying creatures. V'kol nefesh hachaya romeset b'mayim, and any living creature that swarms through the water, that swims through the water. Ulachol nefesh shoretzet ala aretz, and any small animals that scurry across the land. And this we see is exactly how the Torah breaks up the various animals into essentially these four categories. Okay. And if we look back at Genesis 1 in the creation story, the different days of creation, we'll see they're broken up into those same categories. Okay. Lahavdil ben hatameh ben hatahor, so that you may be able to distinguish between that which is acceptable, that which is clean, acceptable to you, and that which is unacceptable to you, and that which is clean or acceptable to you. Ben achaya hane'echelet, uben achaya asher lo te'achel, and between the animal which is permitted to be eaten, which can be eaten, and the animal which should not be eaten, which is not to be eaten. Okay? And that's the end of chapter 11. Again, although it gets very technical at times, I think everything is super logical. Makes a lot of common sense. The animals that Yahweh restricts us from eating are animals that really we shouldn't even want to eat. They're small, or they're swarmy, or they're insect-like, or they're just kind of like gross, right? We shouldn't want to put these things in our mouths, except so much of humanity has disconnected from its connection with Yahweh, and so they eat anything. They eat rats and snakes and monkeys and anything that creeps and crawls and flies. And we as Israel, we are to be holy because Yahweh is holy. So we're to make a distinction between, we are to be the model nation. We're to make a distinction between that which is acceptable for all human beings to eat and that which is unacceptable for all human beings to eat. We're to be the model nation. The rest of the nations, Yahweh, in a sense, gave up on them. And now he's putting all our hope, all his hope and all his efforts into us so that we can serve as a model nation, as a model society to hopefully bring back the rest of humanity to their status of remembering that they're human beings that make distinctions between what they eat and what they don't eat, and not animals that eat anything and everything that moves. Okay? And that's the idea here. That is really the idea of Leviticus chapter 11. What does someone do if they eat an unclean animal? Do they follow the laws of purity to take care of it? So they eat an unclean animal. It doesn't really mention it. I don't think here, right? We didn't see that anywhere. No, we didn't see eating an unclean animal. So I guess it's just expected that you don't eat an unclean animal. I don't know. I guess maybe one could extrapolate and say that, well, if you eat a clean animal, we see what happens if you eat the dead body of a clean animal. Where was it? I think you just right. You wash your clothes and you remain unclean until the evening. I don't know. The Torah doesn't mention it explicitly, so I guess it's up for debate. Maybe you can extrapolate from here. Maybe the Torah just doesn't give instructions on what to do if you eat an unclean animal. I think one could make a good case that you can extrapolate from what you do if you eat a clean animal, because I don't think it wouldn't really, or the dead body of a clean animal that died on its own, because that's kind of similar to, that's also something that you shouldn't eat. I don't know. It doesn't mention explicitly, but I think one can make a case that it would be the same as this if you eat an unclean animal. Okay, but you're not supposed to do it, so I guess the Torah doesn't mention it. Okay. Any other questions? Accidentally. Well, remember, if you do something accidentally, there is a sacrifice. If you find out that you did something inadvertently and then it's later on discovered, that's a chatat. That's a sin offering is to be brought, or a recompense from inadvertent. What are we calling it? Recompense from inadvertent transgression offering. A sin offering, right, is to be brought. Obviously, we can't bring a sin offering in this day and age. And really, again, the whole idea of being in a state of ritual purity or not being in a state of ritual purity is not even relevant to us in this day and age, because we don't have access to the Temple Mount. We don't have a tabernacle in the tabernacle courtyard where the concept of being in a state of ritual purity has any meaning or has any special meaning. Again, going back to what we said here, the whole idea of being ritually pure and ritually impure, okay, has to do with, make this larger, has to do with this, not going within the tabernacle, the province of the tabernacle, within the tabernacle courtyard, while you're in a state of impurity. I think also Leviticus 11, I think it's fair to say it also implies that something above and beyond that, which is just, doing something that's disgusting. We don't want to be in that. We don't want to eat dead animals, and we don't want to eat unkosher animals. So yeah, maybe there's a moral judgment to it as well. But really, I think this is an exception. When we go more into Leviticus and we see when it's really speaking about being clean or unclean in a state of ritual purity or impurity, that it's not a choice. Things just happen to us. So for instance, we're in a tent where another human dies. That's not our fault. It just happens. Or we have regular sexual relations with our wives and emit semen. Now you enter a state of ritual impurity. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just that's something that causes ritual impurity. So I think this might be the exception, because here there is an implication as well that you really should stay away from, sometimes you just have to touch or lift the dead body of an animal, but certainly you don't have to eat these unkosher animals unless you're in a state of desperation. And so I think there is kind of a moral judgment to it, right? You remain holy because I'm holy. Don't do these things. Don't eat these things. And if you do, then you will enter a state of, under certain circumstances, you will enter a state of ritual impurity, which maybe you shouldn't do because you never should have eaten these unclean animals in the first place. But again, there are many other laws here where it's just not your fault. I mean, if there's a dead rat on your front lawn, you've got to move it. If you're eating your Cheerios and the rat falls out of the drop ceiling into your Cheerios, you didn't do anything wrong. So then it just is giving technical information of that you've entered a state of ritual impurity and gotten out of a state of ritual impurity. But certainly in the case of eating, where you're making a conscious choice, then the idea of these clean and unclean animals implies that we want to make a conscious choice to stay away from these unclean, these detestable animals, these unacceptable animals. Okay, so let's sum it up there. Where does the meat milk prohibition come? Yeah, basically from thin air. It comes from lo tivashev gedi b'chalev imo. Do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Which, as when we get to it, and it's not really part of the kashrut laws. When we get to it, it will we'll see that it has absolutely nothing to do with separation of milk and meat. Do not cook a kid in its own mother's milk, and I think that's a very logical prohibition. That's a very logical law, right? I just think anyone would just find it just naturally a disgusting thing to do, to take a little baby animal and then cook it in its own mother's milk, right? The very substance which is supposed to be used to make it grow and to nurture it is now used to cook it, to cook the animal in it. There's just something completely insensitive to human life about it, right? There's just something naturally just repulsive about that. So I think that's all it's talking about. But if it's not its own mother's milk, then there's no explicit prohibition. Okay. Okay. Any final questions? Any final comments before we wrap it up? So we didn't get to Leviticus 12 this time. Let's just, for preview, Leviticus 12 deals with a very specific subject, and that's it's a short topic. It's a short chapter, but we're not going to do it today. It's purification after childbirth. In other words, when a woman has a child, she enters a state of ritual impurity. We'll talk about this next week. And then it speaks about the time period and what she has to do. About what she has to do in order to exit that state of ritual impurity and return to a state of ritual impurity. So there's no choice there. I mean, there's a choice, I guess, to get pregnant, but there's nothing wrong implied there. When a woman has a baby, that's a good thing, right? That's a great thing. But it does cause her to enter the state of ritual impurity, I guess, from all the blood and the goop and the leftover that's in there. At that point, she's kind of icky on the inside, and as perhaps as any woman who's had a baby could testify to. And so she should not come into that holy area. Should not come at that point into the province of the tabernacle. Okay, there's our tabernacle. Come on, tabernacle. There we go. Okay, so that will conquer next week, or we'll tackle next week. That's chapter 12. And other than that, I guess I am going to say Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov to everybody. We'll put on some music, but I will not put on Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah because we'll get blocked again. I'll put on some music that is less prone to copyright violations. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the Torah study. I hope you find it interesting. Again, I find this stuff absolutely fascinating. I find it logical. Inexplicable or non-understandable mystery, as the rabbis would like to make it out to be. It's quite the opposite. Everything is really super logical, if you ask me. Maybe a bit complicated at times, but definitely super logical. Makes a lot of sense, as we saw. And we'll pick it up next week. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for the Torah study. Wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, and we'll see you again next time. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov.
Shamayim